we're moving on. We're moving on, as I say, fast into the new society. There's nothing scary about it to me because I've been reading about it all my life. And the big boys love to print their books out when they retire generally, their memoirs, etc. And they tell you so much, but nobody bothers to read it anymore. The media won't tell you anything about it because they're part of the controlled system. They tell you what to worry about, what not to worry about, or what to ignore completely. And they cannot be trusted actually for anything at all now. There's so much lies, in fact, being spewed out right now from the media to do with the upcoming possible wars and so on, and the recycling of old photographs from other countries with chemical weapons being used over and over again. So many cons have pulled in the past, you could never ever trust them, ever again. But as I say, they're part of the system of control. Well, I've gone through the history often of the media, especially in the US and Britain too, run by the big boys who belong to the biggest club in the world. Basically, the editors, the owners of the newspapers, they know their role in pacifying and entertaining and misleading the public. And that's just a fact, folks. News has nothing to do with truth. Never forget that. News has nothing to do with truth. The truth is hard to find out in your own personal lives with those around you, never mind trying to get it from people with political agendas or geopolitical agendas and so on. It's a very difficult thing, especially since mankind is incredibly unscrupulous, especially the power brokers. Most folk will lie, and petty white lies, of course, to achieve something or simply disclose or hide something, which is their own business. But the big boys who are into power think nothing of lying continuously to the masses of the public. They don't blush. The psychopaths don't blush, of course. And they can rationalize to themselves and each other because all psychopaths know each other and they can actually work awfully well together. But they say it's for the greater good, with themselves at the top being the greatest, so they get the greatest of all goods, you see. And that's how the world really runs. We are the pros, as George Orwell said in 1984, his book. And the pros don't count, he said. The pros don't count. It's only necessary once in a while to get them on board for public opinion, for support for wars and things. And the easiest trick in the book is to smear other people, take them out of context and all the rest of it. They've done this for centuries and centuries. Nothing new under the sun, they say. And there truly isn't. There's nothing new under the sun, except that in ancient times they didn't have photography and newsreels which they could edit and alter, etc., etc. So seeing is not believing anymore. Hasn't been since the invention of photography. In fact, when you go into the history of the scams that were pulled at the very beginning, never mind the present. So you've got to think for yourselves if you want to think at all. It is very, very true, the saying that ignorance is bliss. You can't get a truer saying than ignorance is bliss, because only those who are happy are blissfully ignorant, in fact. They accept the world as it's been presented to them, and they've been indoctrinated into believing since childhood. They question nothing. They think you're paranoid if you come up with alternate facts on anything. I mean facts on anything. Facts don't count, you see, with agendas. Facts really don't count. And most folk, when they're perfectly conditioned, take the mainstream news, like Brzezinski said, as the gospel truth. And they expect the media to do the reasoning for them. In other words, they expect the media to tell them what to be angry about or worried about, because the media, they think, is an appendage to their brain for their reasoning. And of course, it's nothing of the kind at all. Information has always been used to fool people. Always been used to fool people. So much so that if you have a very strong opinion on something in these days, you might be a useful idiot without knowing it. You've all had experience, I'm sure, of trying to, what the popular term today is, wake up, which is the wrong term to use. Just like conspiracy theory was all given to you as well. Terminology is generally given to you by those who control the system, either to ridicule whatever you're talking about, or they bring in aliens or something, or the old Rosicrucian stuff which they revive, and they tell you to vibrate higher and you'll know the truth, etc. But the fact is, information has always been a con. Always been a con. From ancient times, for instance, it took powerful people, even a little clique, a big family, to dominate its neighbours before it could set its sights on dominating and creating what was called a nation. And it's very difficult to do with a big family because generally you're up against a much bigger population who will fight back. And big armies, if you've got a big army to protect you and defend you, to make sure you stay in power, to conquer more territory for your own family, as kings and queens did, you need other things to back you up. You need, number one, money. Without money, folk go home. The army dissolves. It can only carry what it can plunder, and it go home. With the invention of money, that was the key to all powers from then to the present time. Not military might. Money buys military might. Money gets countries into debt. The countries in debt will do what they're told by the big bankers they owe the money to, because the bankers control the world. This is very simple. They control all monies in the planet. There's no mystery of money at all. It's like an elaborate con, and it's been used for thousands of years for this purpose. But you also need generally a religion to back it up too. And in ancient times, pre-Christian times, we saw the different religious groups from Egypt onwards who would back up the Pharaoh and keep the people in their place through fear and terror of all-seeing eyes, etc., or the eye in the sky of the deity, that kind of thing. It's very easy to do once you get the ball rolling, and it's much easier to do too if you can back it up with a paid military where you've got cash to pay them, and you give them extra privileges, because with money you can buy prostitutes, you can buy whatever you want. Money is the key to all power. Some people always focus every generation on the military power. The military power is subordinate to the economic power that rules them all, including the nations. So very early on in human existence, those who discovered the power of money naturally monopolized for themselves the ability to create the money. And that's why they had to get other branches going out into politics to run governments, advising kings and queens and the present-day governments of today. It's amazing how governments say it's good to be in debt. It's somehow good for us to be in debt. Well, debt is slavery. It cannot be defined as any other thing. It's slavery. It goes back to the Old Testament. It was taken from the 5 books of Moses. Debt is slavery. And that was okay in those days too. If you put yourself into financial debt, then your children, your offspring born into the debt were also owned by the master who owned you. Nothing much has changed. Today we call it citizenship. And we find that the citizenship is really a battle to see who has the right to tax you. Because you're a productive unit, you see, you're an economic unit. And this has always been understood by the con men who manage money. And today, of course, it's backed by nothing anyway, which certainly takes a leap of faith. So they're very religious at the top with a leap of faith. But they find as long as the public accept this faith thing, then they can keep giving us pieces of paper. And this makes everything go round, but a lot of it is taken off you through taxes to keep another massive bureaucracy above you going. Because without the bureaucracies, you see, the money couldn't be passed on. The big cut of it couldn't be, and believe you me, it's a huge cut even the bureaucrats get, but they couldn't put the biggest cuts back to the masters of the banks. Because the big banks, are international money lenders, and some of them, by the way, are not even banks. The international money lenders are not even banks. They don't have branches across the world or anything like that. But they are the big money lenders, and they're often families. And they run the world. They have to be pulled in when big meetings go on for government to discuss the debt. We want to go to war with these folk. Can we afford it? Then the bankers look to see what they can get out of it, of course, which is always to do with interest and compound interest over time and how much they'll project into the future according to how much is going to get borrowed to keep this war going once it's started, and supply, etc. It's great business. Because mankind truly, and when it comes to those who rule in power, it's not very nice at all. It's never been very nice. The history of the world has been one of slaughter. Slaughter. The history books, remember, were often written by those around kings and queens or ancient Caesars and so on. in ancient Rome. And they had to write the stuff at the time to suit the guy who was the top honcho, at least the representative of the top honcho, because even behind them there were the bankers, by the way, and who also collected the taxes. They were given the right to collect taxes off the general public. It's called tax farming. By the king, queen, or pharaoh, whoever happens to be, in order to pay off the debt of the money that the king was borrowing, or nobility or aristocracy, to spoil themselves in their lavish lifestyles, and they gave the right to tax the peasants to the tax farmers. Today they don't bother. They've got even better front. They use the government to collect the taxes themselves to pay off debts and so on, national debts, to the bankers. So the bankers that hide behind the scenes are kept out of the picture, and we just despise what we think is the taxation agencies. Plus, it saves the bankers sending out their tax farmers too. It saves them money. They can use the governments to do it for them. So it's all to do with how you perceive things. Perception management is as old as the hills, as they say. And that's an awful old hill there. So we're living in a very predatory system. It's always been that way, as I say. Those who seek power are the top predators. They've got a polished art today, polished surface of respectability through the PR machines that run the media for us. But at heart, they're just the same power-hungry fiends that have turned armies loose on their own publics in ages gone by, over and over again. We never seem to learn. We seem to think somehow, we've fallen for this thing called progress. No one ever defines what progress means. But there is an agenda here, by the way, a very old agenda. And whenever they say progress, they're talking about their own agenda, world domination, etc., but a new system as well, and an eventual drastic reduction of populations, right into the genetic cloning of new slaves down the road, to serve the elite, you see. And all of that's called progress. And we're told you can't stop progress. And we learn to part this stuff since from childhood. You can't stop progress. Another one is, the only thing you can be sure of is death and taxes. So you become acclimatized to what is an inevitability, you see. A fatalistic outlook that nothing can ever be done. And this has all been taught to you by the predators who control you. Sad thing to imagine. Now, normal folk can't get into the headspace of the psychopaths. And they have big, huge world clubs, the psychopaths, including the banking clubs and so on. And we can't get into their headspace because you are not that way, you see. You're more human in your emotions and your reactions, your dealings with others. Those at the top don't have those, they call it impediments. The human emotion of having empathy towards other people, especially ones of lower status. We're called the masses, the herd, the unwashed masses, etc. This is what they call us, in fact. But when they go on television with their PR stuff and a little bit of acting, which all politicians now pay money to get basic deportment and acting, and it's paid for by the taxpayers now, it's an expense, so they can con you better and how to present their con jobs over to you, you see. Now, it's also a truism in politics that you can't please all of the people all of the time. So they don't intend to, but they try to please as many as they possibly can by saying the things which are unquestioned by the masses. Very simple things. Election time is unemployment, education. It's just a mantra they go through. And that means that they feel your pain. In other words, the topics which are important to you, they at least recognize on the surface. But mind you, these are born liars. They're telling you this stuff. They feel nothing for you, and they want to enrich themselves and have money for their own progeny to go off in the future, living awfully well off of you. Because the history of the world is one of slavery, and Charles Galton Darwin said it in his book, The Next Million Years. He says there's always been slavery in one form or another, and we are in the process of creating a more sophisticated form of slavery. And what he meant was, is the system you're in today, you don't know you are a slave. Ask people what they worry about. What do they worry about? Money. Most divorces start off with in the lower classes especially, they get hit first over fighting over money for basic essentials. You can't have a harmony when you're fighting and squabbling over bare essentials because you're both terrified, the male and the female, the children, the whole thing. Everyone's terrified of being evicted, whatever it happens to be, is fear, fear, fear is promoted. But that also goes all the way up the ladder too, because most classes live to